I am Mike Weinhold from Northeast Legal Aid, and this is
Kristin Parent from Northeast Legal Aid.
Yep. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our organization, and then Kristin's going to tell you about all the different areas that we work on, and I'll tell you how you can contact us, or if people you know want to contact us, how they can contact us, and that's going to end the first part of the presentation. In the second part, we're going to do a presentation about the U.S. government, kind of like a civics lesson, and specifically about the Massachusetts court system. So we're going to really focus on like what the different courts are in Massachusetts. So first, this is our information, Northeast Legal Aid and Northeast Justice Center. In a little bit, I'm going to get into why we have two different names. And we have 3 offices, Lowell, right there in the middle on John Street. That's right in downtown Lowell. Lawrence, we're over by like the Marston Street exit. We're not really downtown. And then in Lynn, over on Union Street.
All L's?
Yes, all L's, except like Leominster and Lunenburg. Don't go there, we don't have any offices. All right, this is our mission statement. Generally speaking, what we do is we represent low-income, elderly, and disabled people in a whole variety of cases. We're trying to provide legal services to people that can't afford attorneys. We work on civil cases. Does everyone know what the difference between civil and criminal cases are? We're going to talk about it a little bit more later on, but criminal legal advice would be provided in Massachusetts by CPCS, which is like the Public Defender's Office. Legal aid, we can't do any criminal work, we just do civil cases. Civil cases are cases where there's a plaintiff suing a defendant. Criminal cases are where the state's suing someone. Civil cases are about damages and money or stopping someone from doing something. Criminal cases are about, someone goes to jail or gets fined or penalized by the state. All right, so this is our mission statement and a description of how many people we have. Our staff has gotten bigger. We're up to 48 people, 29 attorneys. So that's approximate. I don't know if that's accurate right now. 7 paralegals is right, and 12 management and intake staff. And we're always looking for more volunteers too. So if you know someone that would like to volunteer, it could be anyone that just has extra time. We're always looking for volunteers to help. They don't have to be lawyers. We have work for people that just want to help with filing or organizing in the office. That could happen too. All right, who we are. We're a nonprofit. Our clients don't pay us. We're not like a law firm where people come in and they pay us per hour or anything like that. If we make money from a case, it's either because the statutes involved in the case specifically say if you win, the other side has to pay for your attorney. It's called attorney's fees. Or if we get like big settlements or big judgments for people, then we can keep part of it. But we're not driven by profit. Any profits we get just help us get more staff to help more people out. Most of our money that we get to run the organization comes from government grants or from donations or other grant programs. So if you guys are familiar with legal services from before, you might not recognize the name because 5 years ago, we were created by the merger of 2 different organizations. We had Neighborhood Legal Services, which was Essex County, and Merrimack Valley Legal Services, which was in Middlesex County. And they merged, and that's when we became Northeast Legal Aid. So if you're familiar with Neighborhood Legal Services, if you've heard of Merrimack Valley Legal Services, those are the same as Northeast Legal Aid. Northeast Justice Center is also basically the same as Northeast Legal Aid. It's a subsidiary that we started, and the reason we have that is so that we can do work that Northeast Legal Aid can't do. Sometimes when we get grants, they come with strings attached, and they prevent us from doing certain types of work. The subsidiary can do the work, but Northeast Legal Aid can't. It's a little bit boring, but big picture, it's all the same thing. All right, and I already told you where the offices are, so now I will pass it to Kristin, who will tell us all about the areas of work we do.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everybody. So we do a variety of we practice in a variety of different areas of law. One of the biggest areas that we focus on is housing. It consistently comes up in different needs assessments and requests for services. So that mostly includes landlord-tenant law, meaning eviction defense. So we're frequently representing tenants and fighting housing discrimination and a variety of other cases that fall under that purview. For a long time, we were doing foreclosure prevention. I'm sure some of you heard through the grapevine that the Attorney General for a long time after the 2008 housing crash was helping fund legal services to do foreclosure prevention, meaning that we would represent tenants in houses that had been foreclosed, or we'd represent homeowners after foreclosure to try to help preserve their housing or help them on their way out. So we also do subsidized housing, meaning if somebody lives in public housing, is trying to get into public housing, has been denied, is in possession of a voucher, whether it's a Section 8 voucher or a different Massachusetts type of voucher. So helping the low-income and elderly population maintain their housing. We offer a variety of services, including clinics to help people set up their case for court, and lawyer of the day programs in the various housing courts. We also offer public benefit services, and there's a whole variety of different benefits that you could get from the government that we're involved in. So including Social Security denials or terminations. We work with people for other types of government benefits like welfare, but what's called TAFDC, SNAP, which is food stamps, EAEDC, which is a state-provided disability, and child care vouchers and subsidies from the state. Another type of benefits that we work in outside of subsidized housing, which we mentioned under housing, is unemployment compensation claims. Medicaid, so Medicaid is mass health denials in certain circumstances, and then last but not least, emergency assistance shelter benefits. So if a mom and her kids or a dad and a kids or family has been denied from shelter, we help with those cases too. We also do family law. Specifically, we represent survivors of domestic violence in either custody or divorce disputes. And these are the main areas we focus on. So dividing assets, support, making sure they're safe throughout the whole process, and helping them connect to services to stay safe beyond that. We also do some immigration. Northeast Legal Aid doesn't do immigration. Our subsidiary, Northeast Justice Center, does the immigration. The main idea, the main separation being that Northeast Legal Aid receives federal funding and Northeast Justice Center does not. Okay. So one of the biggest areas in immigration that we're focusing on now is special juvenile status approvals. We also do elder law. We just got a brand new attorney in the Lowell office focusing on elder law areas. We do nursing home rights, elder abuse and exploitation, eviction defense, and guardianships. We have a community development practice, which is a small business type of development. We have an attorney who works out of the Lawrence office but helps the other communities too. She can either help a business get started up, with all the paperwork to get started, to help figure out how to make sure their business is following the right steps, legally, and any other things that a small business might need. We offer a bunch of other services as well, but those are the main ones. Michael?
Oh yeah, did anyone have any questions about the different types of work that we do? Like, does anyone have a question about whether we handle specific types of cases? Yeah.
The small businesses, like,
Sure.
at what level does the small business, are you able to help that small business? How much backing do they have to have? How much money do they already have to have?
It can vary. I think that it's a case-by-case basis, and that if you do know a small business that is having difficulty, that you should encourage them to check in with our intake line to see if they qualify at that time. I know that there's been assistance given to small, just one person starting up shop doing maybe printing, or there was a restaurant. I know I can think of off the top of my head a couple restaurants actually that came with not much backing at all. So.
Yeah, traditionally, legal aid didn't do any type of work for small businesses. There was someone that came and he had a Skadden Fellowship, which is like a prestigious fellowship to do certain type of legal services. And he worked at our office, and I mean, maybe this was like 4 years ago, and it was the first I'd heard of anyone doing legal services in this area. And so he started up a practice, then we had another attorney come on and do it. She's actually subsequently become elected to the Cambridge City Council, so she's only working part-time, but she still does have an open practice for this. And it's not really a cap, I think, of how much money they do have, like it'd be more. It's more like for someone that does want to start out and doesn't know how to like set up an LLC or minor things.
How to get there?
Yeah. Yep.
Would you deal with people that are 501c3?
Like, could we represent a charity? Yeah. So.
Like a startup?
Yeah. I don't know. She might. I mean, it'd be worth contacting to see. I know that even more generally, it is possible for us to, because generally we represent individuals, but it is possible to represent a 501c3 or an organization, so long as the organization, most of their people would be client eligible. So it doesn't happen a lot, but for instance, if there was a community organization, a tenants association, or maybe a community organization where most of the people had a disability or were receiving the same benefit, we could represent them. If it was someone just starting their own 501c3, I don't know that we do it, but it'd be worth calling. I think.
Yes, you represent tenants. Do you ever represent a landlord?
I think that there are those services available through the Lawyer of the Day program, because we solicit private bar attorneys. So attorneys who aren't part of legal aid also come and volunteer at the Lawyer for the Day program. And I know landlords have gotten assistance through that program as well.
Attorneys, yeah, the attorneys always have to be mindful of a conflict of interest. So if we represented someone that had 10 units in a town, and then any tenant they ever had that had a dispute with them down the road, we'd be conflicted out of the case because a former client would have been the landlord. So we generally do not represent landlords ourselves. Yeah. Should we kick through to the next few slides? All right, so we don't have our statistics for 2018 yet, but these are the 2017 statistics. Opened, when it says we opened cases, that means we did just under 2,000 cases. 7,000 is the amount of people that contacted us, and we closed cases, so we opened more than we closed. We gotta close those cases.
And we, I know, and we benefited about 8,000 people in that year. Our organization has grown since then, so likely the numbers are larger this year.
These are some quotes from satisfied clients. The next slide will have dissatisfied clients.
Yeah.
All right, and these are, we'll have to add this presentation. These are just, we do a lot of presentations to the community, whether it be, for a community action program or a senior center. We go and we do a lot of presentations.
General outreach to the community.
Yep. So we're always looking for volunteers, as I mentioned earlier. This is how you can contact us. If anyone's interested in volunteering, just grab a card at the end, or me and Kristin will give you our contact info. And if you know anyone that wants to contact us to request legal assistance, there's basically 3 different ways you can do it. You can walk into one of our offices if you go during business hours, and you could submit a request for legal services in person. You could also call. We have a toll-free number, and I don't have the toll-free number, but it's online. That's our general intake line, so if you call, you leave a message, someone will call you back, or you might be able to catch them live. And then finally, you can do the intake online. We have a form online, so you can request online. And people usually get back in touch relatively soon. That would just generally be the intake interview, what's your problem? And if it's something that we might be able to help on, then an attorney would be assigned to talk to you about the case. Does anyone have any questions about Northeast Legal Aid?
Or legal aid in general.
Yeah.
No. All right, thank you.
All right, so switch to the next one. All right, so we're in phase 2. Phase 1's done. We're into phase 2. The court system. This is basically like civics lesson, but with a little bit more focus on the courts. So the U.S. government is a federalist government. That means we have federal government and state government. The people in the United States are sovereign. It means the people have power, okay? And the people have given that power to their government. So they do that by constitutions. There's a state constitution and a federal constitution. Federal constitution, we the people. It's the people giving power to the U.S. federal government. So when you think about it, the states were formed first. People gave their power to the state first. The Constitution is the people giving power to the federal government, and the Constitution is not that long. It spells out what power they give to people, and it also specifies in the 10th Amendment that the powers not given to the federal government are reserved for the states. So when we talk about courts, we're going to talk about federal courts, but we're also going to talk about state courts. And we'll talk about federal legislature, but we'll also talk about state legislatures. That's the US, that's Massachusetts. All right, so this is just a Venn diagram. No one's going to be tested, so you don't have to memorize these, about the different powers that the federal government and the state government has, because we give different powers to each one. When we talked earlier about criminal cases, most criminal cases you hear of, those are state laws that are being violated. State laws regulate things that prevent, assaults, batteries, arrests. No one is ever going to get convicted by a U.S. attorney on a federal crime of burglary. I mean, maybe that happened under some strange federal statute, but for the most part, those are state laws. Okay? States also, it's most of the day-to-day stuff we deal with, it's going to be state laws. Car accident and one person sues someone else. That's all dictated by state case law. Breach of contract, state case law. Federal government's got very specific things like national powers, declaring war. What else we got? Copyrights and patents. That's all federal law. Postal system, federal law. Let's see. And then this stuff in the middle they both can do. As everyone here probably knows, both the federal government and the state can tax you. Let's see. So the three branches of government.
There's the executive branch, there's the legislative branch, and there's the judicial branch. The executive branch is in charge of all of the law enforcement. The legislative branch is in charge of making the law, and the judicial branch is in charge of interpreting the law and applying it. As you can see, there's a whole checks and balances system. Each branch of the law has its own way of interacting with the other branches. So for example, the executive branch confirms or rejects appointments of judges or other people on various committees. The executive can also veto legislation that's been made that they don't think that is appropriate or lawful for the community. The judicial branch interprets the laws that the legislative branch writes and the executive branch puts into power.
So we could give some real examples on this. All right, let's see. Executive can veto legislation. Does everyone know that the government was shut down? Yeah, and it's now back open. Well, part of the government shutdown was that President Trump would have vetoed any deal that did not include a border wall. He would have been able to veto the spending bill. That's the executive using his veto power. Confirms or rejects appointments by the executive. Does everyone remember Brett Kavanaugh? And there was a Senate hearing, right? That was the legislature using its power over the executive. President Trump was able to nominate a judge, and then the legislature could determine whether or not to approve the judge. So it wasn't one person having all the power. Like we said, the executive appoints judges. Let's see, and then legislative appointments by the executive. Oh, so we did legislative of the judicial. Of the executive would be the Attorney General right now. The Attorney General Barr was just recently at hearings a few weeks ago, and the legislature will have to determine whether or not to approve the appointment or not. Judicial, which is what we'll talk about a little bit longer, they can determine the judicial branch if the executive, what they did was unlawful, or if what the legislature did by passing a law was unlawful. So example of the executive, the Trump travel ban, it was overturned. That's the judicial branch saying that the executive branch had stepped out of bounds. What's a good example of judicial over legislative right now? Can't think of one. There's a ton of examples where it happens. The legislature passes a law and the judicial branch says that was no good. Just can't think of it happening recently in the news. All right, here's the executive branch, the president and the governor. No comments. All right, the legislative branch. Federal government, this is, like we said at first, there's the federal government and the state government. This is the information for the federal government. House of Representatives has 435 members. That's a lot of people. Massachusetts, we have 9. They get elected every 2 years, which is really soon. So we just had elections in 2018, and Chelmsford is in the 3rd Congressional District, and Lori Trahan was elected. She replaced Nikki Songas, who had been the longtime representative from this area. The Senate, every state has 2 senators, so there's 100 senators in total. Massachusetts has Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey. The legislative branch in the state, it doesn't get as much coverage on the news. There's 160 state House representatives. I tried to look up which ones cover Chelmsford, and it was really tough for me to figure out. You can figure out based off your address. If you go to your house, you can do Find My Legislator, and it will say who yours is. I looked up in North Chelmsford and found out who mine was, and then I put the library's address, and it's someone different. Then I went to the Chelmsford Wikipedia page, and they said there were 4 people, but it wasn't current. So I don't know if it's still 4 people or not.
And the website that Michael's talking about is www.findmylegislator.com.
Not bad. And I think that Michael J. Barrett's the state senator for all of Chelmsford, as far as I could tell. All right, so they make the state laws. The previous slide, they make the federal laws. All right, judicial branch.
Sure. In the federal courts, there's 3 separate branches. It's broken down the same way in the state courts, but the names are a little bit different. So for the highest court in the country, it's the Supreme Court. There's 9 justices, and they get appointed by the president. They are allowed to be justices until they die, or unless there's bad behavior in limited circumstances. They could retire, but they have the ability to be justices until they pass away. As we all know, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is getting up there. She's almost 90, right?
Yeah.
The appellate courts, which is the next level down, there's 12 circuits and a federal circuit court. Those are the level just below there, but that's where a case would go after it's appealed from a district court decision. There's 94 district courts across the country, and there's included in there's specialty courts like bankruptcy court, federal claims court, and international trade court. If a decision comes out in those courts and someone doesn't like it, or they can find a legal hook to appeal it, then that case would go up to the appeals court. And the Supreme Court can either take that sua sponte on their own, meaning sua sponte means on their own, or it can be appealed after the appeals court.
Here we get a graph. So this is basically the same information, just in a graph.
Right.
So the Supreme Court, that's the highest court in the whole country. That's usually the judges you'll hear about on the news.
Sure.
All right, so I'm not going to go through all of this because it's extremely detailed, but this talks about different jurisdiction for the different courts. So as we talked about earlier, like personal injury lawsuits, like a car accident, traffic violations, malpractice, so if someone's suing their doctor or suing their lawyer or their architect, landlord-tenant disputes, most of the lawsuits you hear of end up at state court. Some of the state court stuff can get to federal court if it's for a certain amount of money. Less cases get filed in federal court, much less cases. And the federal courthouses are very, very nice. The state ones are pretty nice now, but the federal ones are really nice. Let's see. So federal courts, crimes enacted by Congress, federal laws, interstate commerce, that's what we were talking about earlier, about big cases involving people from like maybe someone from New Hampshire sue someone from Massachusetts. That's diversity jurisdiction. And then there's certain ones that could happen in both. All right.
This is the state, Massachusetts state breakdown of the different court systems here. There's the Supreme Judicial Court, which is one of the oldest operating courts in the entire country. It dates back to the 1600s. There's the appeals court, and then there's 7 different trial courts, which is pretty interesting because most other states just lump a lot of this stuff together in one court, and you'll have a district court judge, or some other states call it Supreme Court judges at that level, but at that level, there'll be one person sitting there and they'll have to say, okay, I know about housing, okay, I know about family, oh, okay, let me talk about this specialized child case. And you don't really get as much attention and knowledgeable attention to those special issues. Although I'm sure those judges are very smart, we're very lucky in the Commonwealth that we have these different courts. So we have the Superior Court, the District Court, Land Court, Housing Court, Juvenile Court, Probate and Family Court, and Boston Municipal Court. Boston Municipal Court is an old political hangover from the days of yore, but it's essentially a district court. Each of these courts does something different. A lot of it is fairly self-explanatory. Divorces go to probate and family court. Anything involving kids goes to the juvenile court department that's not involving mom to dad custody or mom to mom or dad to dad. Superior Court, there are more serious crimes and monetary claims at a higher level. So, for example, civil actions over $25,000 would go to Superior Court. Superior Court also handles some of the heavier lifting criminal matters, such as murder or, in some instances, kidnapping, and other sorts of specialized criminal matters, as I said. District Court does deal with a wide variety of different issues that the other trial courts deal with, but it's mostly a criminal court and a smaller scale civil matter court. The land court, right, is exactly what it talks about. It deals with disputes over property, like where land should be, foreclosures start out there, title issues, yep.
So around here, the Superior Court is 360 Gorham Street in Lowell, and the District Court's over on Hurd Street in Lowell. And the land court, there's only one land court, it's in Boston. But those will probably be, the Superior Court and District Court will be in the new building. Have you guys seen the new building that's being built in Lowell? Yeah. So.
They're building a brand new multiplex in downtown Lowell over by the Gallagher train terminal.
All right. Housing court. So our office takes a lot of cases in housing court. The bulk of the case in housing court are landlord-tenant evictions, but you could also have code enforcement cases or small claims cases, and they have to do with housing, like you didn't give me my security deposit back, or you still owe me some of the rent. That could be a small claims case. And the juvenile court has jurisdiction over cases that have to do with children, children in need of service, care and protection petitions. It's a specialty court that tries to handle with some sophistication and sort of like some caring the issues that are unique to juvenile litigants. All right, you want to? This is your bread and butter.
Right, I practice in the probate and family court quite often. They handle a variety of different matters. They deal with estates, they deal with guardianship, they do divorce, they do custody matters, things that really have to do with parties and how they interact with their personal rights is kind of a broad way of describing it. There's more specific information up there and in the handouts. The Boston Municipal Court, as noted earlier, it's really just a district court, but because Boston is so large, they needed a court to focus just on Boston. So they created the Boston Municipal Court and kept it throughout the years.
I'm going to go back to a few of the slides because I didn't put them in a good order earlier. So we'll go back. Let's see. So this was the court system in a chart. These are all the different departments that we talked about. So the Supreme Judicial Court, that's the highest court, like Kristin said, and the Court of Appeals. And these are all the lower ones. So there is some interaction between federal and state courts where sometimes the cases that the U.S. Supreme Court will hear actually originated in states. So if a case makes it all the way up the ladder for a state trial court, so that could be like any of the courts Kristin was just talking about, housing court, probate and family court, district superior, then it goes up to an appeals court, okay? Then it goes up to the Supreme Judicial Court, that's the state Supreme Court. Say the decision still wants, the litigants still want to appeal. In certain instances, the U.S. Supreme Court will take the case. What's one that happened like this? The case, the masterpiece, the cake case that was in the news last year about does a cake baker have the religious right to object to making a cake for a same-sex couple, or is that discrimination because they're same-sex couple and they have the right to have a cake? That was a Colorado case, and it started out in Colorado's Commission Against Discrimination, went up the Colorado court ladder, and then got to the U.S. Supreme Court. It didn't start as a federal case, but if a case starts as a federal case, then it will go up and could go up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Supreme Court doesn't take most cases. Most of the time, people will petition the Supreme Court, and it will be denied. They'll petition it for certiorari. That's the legal word. So fit that into a conversation in the next few days. Trial courts versus appellate courts. Trial courts hear the original cases. So you're watching TV. It's Law and Order. Someone's on the witness stand. Someone's saying objection. Someone's like, you can't handle the truth. Trial court. Appellate courts, not on TV. Never on TV. Appellate courts, just two lawyers stand there, and they're very polite, and they talk and talk and talk, and the judges ask them questions. There's no evidence. It's just about reviewing decisions from the lower court. Criminal versus civil law. Did I talk about this earlier? I hadn't said this earlier, right? Plaintiff versus the state, or plaintiff's the state in criminal law. So that would be like this Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Mike Weinhold would be the criminal case. Whereas the civil law case would be Kristin Parent versus Mike Weinhold. Criminal cases are guilty or not guilty. Civil cases are not about that. It's about who's liable, who wins the judgment. The burden of proof is really high. In a criminal case, it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. In a civil case, it is not really high. It's preponderance of the evidence. So like real far throwback to O.J. Simpson. He was not convicted criminally. They couldn't show beyond a reasonable doubt that he was guilty. But he was civilly sued, and he lost civilly because a preponderance of the evidence said that he did, I forget if he was sued for wrongful death or battery, but they found that preponderance of the evidence said that he was liable for that.
So in terms of thinking about what that looks like, for a visual example, beyond a reasonable doubt looks more like this on the scales of justice, and preponderance of the evidence looks more like this. Okay? So that's why it's such a high difference between the two, such a large difference rather.
Yeah, and it makes sense because if you're convicted criminally, the penalties are severe. You could be incarcerated, whereas civilly, if you lose, you owe money. It's not the same penalty. All right, questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Some states legalize marijuana, but some doesn't. So in case there are argument, which court or which system go to?
Well, it's actually, marijuana is still illegal under the federal government's scheme, but if it's a federal agency enforcing the law, then the federal laws apply. But if it's a state agency or a civil or a municipal or something like that, like a city or town, then their laws apply.
Yeah, there's Andrew Lelling is the U.S. Attorney General for Massachusetts, and he was just in the news talking about this the other day, because now that Massachusetts has legalized marijuana, the problem is, like Kristin said, it's still illegal on a federal level, and his job is to enforce federal laws. So what does he do? What happens with all these marijuana dispensary plants coming out? And he made a statement that it wasn't a top priority for his office, but that's still risky. Like if you were going to open a dispensary, you'd always be worried, like you're technically violating federal law even if the state said it was okay. Mm-hmm. So you're really counting on the federal law not to enforce those laws. And they were talking about in the context because Marty Walsh, the mayor of Boston, had recently gone to Canada, I think it was Toronto or something, to see about, there were clinics where people could do drugs or opioids in a controlled environment to prevent overdoses, but people would still be addicted. You know, it'd be safer for them to do the drugs there. And it was, could Massachusetts adopt that? And the mayor of Boston seemed to be thinking about it. And the U.S. Attorney General, Andrew Lelling, he said in the press that, you know, he would enforce the federal laws if they did try to do that. So the whole point of the conversation was, well, it's not a top priority for marijuana dispensaries, but for the opioid clinics where people are using it controlled, why would you enforce it then? And I mean, I think it's just a priority of the office. But technically speaking, he could enforce any federal law, and under federal law, both are illegal, so it would be a risk. Your question was about different states, though. And that's more of a states' rights issue. Remember when we talked about state legislatures in New Hampshire? People elect state legislators. In Massachusetts they do. And they can make whatever laws they want. So it really depends on what the people choose to do when they write the law. But, as Kristin said, it's all still illegal federally.
But what about Massachusetts? Do you know, are you allowed to have less than 1 ounce of marijuana, right?
So that's different. That's decriminalization. That happened before the dispensaries were legal. That was more just the, as a criminal thing, saying that you're not going to be prosecuted if you had up to a certain amount. And then legalization was it's going to be okay to sell from these dispensaries. With all this being said, this is stuff that I've seen in the news. Our office does not do any cases on marijuana
But we're very
dispensaries.
interested in
I don't
the
know if our
discussion.
community development in theory could do that.
The vote last year, I think it was on the vote. It's something that
Yeah, it was.
Sure.
It did. It passed
Yeah.
a few years ago, and they just opened the first dispensaries maybe 2 months ago. I don't know. Yeah.
On the vote, it was the medical marijuana, something like that. I remember.
That's even before.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's separate and apart, right? Because then you have a doctor saying you have to have it.
Right.
Any non-marijuana questions from Chelmsford?
Because I know Chelmsford isn't a dispensary location, right?
Yeah, and actually that's the thing. The local municipalities could vote to not allow dispensaries in their town. I think Chelmsford voted not to, right? Does anyone know? I think that's what happened. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think that's what you're.
Yeah. A lot of towns around here did that. Any other questions?
How did you decide to become a part of legal aid, just you as individuals, as trained lawyers?
You want to go first? You want me to go first?
You can go first.
I didn't. A lot of people at our office knew they wanted to do legal aid from before they even went to law school. I didn't. I went to law school and I studied abroad in undergrad, then in law school twice, and I went and got a degree in globalization. I came back, and it was after the crisis, and there weren't that many jobs, and I started volunteering while I was looking for a job, and I worked with this woman, Jennifer Kurz, who's a great attorney, and she was helping people out with the foreclosure crisis. And so I started to volunteer and help her out with work, and I actually left and then worked on the foreclosure crisis for the Attorney General's office for about 6 months. And unfortunately, Jennifer got sick, and she had to leave her job, and she ultimately passed away since then, but they were hiring for her job, and I got the job that she had before, and she was a really good attorney, and she was an inspiration, and the dedication she had for her clients was really high. She was a very dedicated legal aid attorney, and so, you know, it was sort of just I volunteered, and I really liked it. And that was back in 2013, I think, or 2014, and I've been here since.
How do you follow that? I don't have such a loving tribute, although I was born and raised in Lowell, just over the line here. I felt as though when I got out of school and I had this doctorate, I had my master's degree, I had my bachelor's degree, growing up in the community that needs more people to come back to it, to revitalize it, I couldn't walk away. You know, I came from the community, I wanted to come back and help and continue to give back to the community that helped give me the ability to come up and get these wonderful degrees. So I really just from the community and dedicated to it.
It's a great job, too.
Yeah.
You feel good about what you do.
It's true, most days.
New Hampshire says This before I walked in.
Sure.
How much staff do you have, both, attorney-wise and some people, just part-time and come in and help out, and support staff?
Yeah, so we did have on one of the slides. I don't know the exact numbers. Do you remember what they were?
There's about 30 attorneys. I think that our organization is no more than 60 people, but we're spread over a large geographic region. We do all of Essex County and northern Middlesex County. We have offices in Lawrence, Lynn, and Lowell, and we try to serve as many people as we can.
Yeah,
Do you have a specific area that you were interested in hearing about?
It's really a big area, and we don't have enough staff to even come close to cover the demand. Depending on the practice area, we turn away probably 60 to 70% of people that are eligible for services. And the people that are eligible for services, there's income guidelines or age requirements or asset requirements. So we don't have enough lawyers to even field the amount of cases. But it's still we're helping 30 to 40 people, which is a big difference because those are people that otherwise would not have any legal advice at all.
I don't live here in Chelmsford, but
Sure.
I'm thinking I need help with some people that live in Essex County. So where would I initiate help?
With our organization, you would call the intake line and see if that's an area of law that we help in, and then separately they determine if you qualify. If you have a specific area that you want to kind of chat about after, I'm happy to do that too.
Yeah, but both of those areas are covered by our office.
Right.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter if you go to the Lowell office, Lawrence office, Lynn. You could walk into the Lynn office and say, I live in Lawrence, and they'd still do the intake. It wouldn't matter.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The one line goes to all of our intake workers that distribute the cases down to us.
How do you decide which cases to take?
We have priorities set up for each practice group. So to triage which cases come in. For instance, in family law, there's a priority that the case would involve domestic violence. If you're thinking about a housing case, if someone contacted and they had a housing voucher, that would be a higher priority to take because if someone's evicted and they have a voucher, it's more disastrous for them than if someone's just in a private landlord-tenant relationship.
Because the voucher would have potential lifetime ramifications
Yeah.
to lose.
A housing voucher is something too that it helps you pay rent. It supplements part of the rent. I should have defined that. Other practice areas, it could just be the strength of a case. If your case is not a high likelihood of winning, maybe a private attorney would take it on the chance that it would win, but we can't do that because we only have so many resources, and it's a little irresponsible if we think there's a real long shot case to go forward with it, because every time that we're spending, every hour we spend on that case is an hour that we weren't helping someone else in an eviction case or in a custody dispute involving domestic violence or any of the other practice areas that we take on. And so every area, we've done needs assessments where we meet with people in the community and community groups, whether it be senior centers or housing authorities or people from tenants associations, anyone. We invite them to comment, then we rank everything. It's really a process, and then we determine what is the highest priority, what's the highest need for people in the community. And then we put all the cases in a hat, and then we pick out 20 of them, and then we do those ones.
I don't know how they do things with Lawrence.
I want to ask, is there any conflict with other legal services? Because when on the family law, domestic violence, I can think about another foundation, the Women Violence Foundation, where they do such cases. So how is there any conflict? How do you separate? I don't know, you are maybe down here, you are in Essex County, maybe they are in Boston, I don't know. Is there any collaboration? Is there any?
Legal services offices throughout the state keep in contact with each other about what types of cases they're taking, trends they're seeing. We actually have statewide listservs where we talk about issues, and we meet with other places that are also taking similar legal cases so that we are all talking about what's going on in the community to work together to fight injustice. But we aren't taking the same clients If you live here, then you go to this one. If you live here, then you go to this one. So it'd be different in that manner.
Is our website masslegalhelp.com or .org?
Yeah.
Masslegalhelp.org. You can go to that website, and it's got options. Where do you live? What type of legal issue? And you go through, and then at the end it will tell you what organizations could help you. So like if you weren't sure, do I contact Northeast Legal Aid, or do I contact Greater Boston Legal Services or Metro West Legal Service? You go there and it will tell you to contact.
And for the most part, I haven't heard anything contrary to this, but legal services organizations are generally friendly. If you call and say, I live in Brockton and I need help, they won't say, okay, this isn't your place. They'll say, oh, okay, well, you call South Coastal County Legal Services and here's their phone number. So don't ever be shy about calling to ask a random question like that.
Any more? Any other questions?